When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time.
Expert witnesses are the golden thread that runs through cases that every single conviction needs.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
There are so many important pieces of evidence: paint evidence, glass, fibre evidence.
They search harder and look deeper, using the very latest techniques.
If I can work out how old those insects are, that's going to give me the minimum time since death.
This is the inside story of how science helped solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
It really was becoming the last throw of the dice.
Nothing's going to bring her back, but she'd had the justice that she rightly deserved.
This is the story of the expert witness. Domestic violence is a crime that should never be tolerated. Yet every week in England and Wales, 2 women are killed by a current or former partner. In this programme, we'll reveal how, in 2 separate cases, evidence from expert witnesses helped put 2 violent husbands where they belong, behind bars.
I've covered a lot of gruesome murder cases. Paul Hemming is without doubt one of the nastiest, conniving individuals that I've ever had the misfortune to come across.
And we'll reveal how another abusive partner thought he had outwitted the law, but hadn't reckoned on an expert witness.
There were 7 bone fragments, which contained cut and saw marks.
Forensic entomologists can help in an investigation in many different ways, and one of the prime ones is to try to estimate how long someone's dead. We're able to build up a picture of what happened to that person from the point of death until they were found, and this can play a big role in the investigation.
May 2016, Milton Keynes. 31-year-old Natalie Hemming is reported missing from the home she shared with her partner and 3 young children.
Natalie was my youngest sister. She was funny, she was kind, she was an amazing mum. The day that it all happened, the usual thing, I was on the school run. My mum phoned me and she said, "I can't get hold of Natalie." And I said, "Well, she's at work, Mum, you know, she'll ring you when she finished." And she went, "No, you don't understand, Jo. I haven't been able to get hold of her since she left my house on the Sunday." That instant, my stomach just dropped.
Investigative journalist Nick Britton covered the case.
2 days after Natalie went missing, her mother made the phone call to the police saying that her daughter hadn't been seen of or heard of, and this was very unusual for her. And she was extremely worried. Of course, at that stage, it was a missing persons inquiry.
Natalie's partner Paul told police that as soon as the children were in bed, she went to stay with a friend. But this did not sound likely to Natalie's family.
As a mum, I would never leave my children, and I would never just disappear without telling somebody. So the fact that she'd been gone for that long and she hadn't told me or Kerry or my mum where she was going firstly, that the fact that the children were just left. Everything about that is just wrong.
As police made further inquiries, they became increasingly suspicious of Natalie's partner, Paul.
He got caught out very quickly in the lie that she was with a friend, and the friend's name that he'd given, he didn't realise we knew her and had her number. So all of those kinds of things, I think it was very obvious to the police very quickly that something was very, very wrong.
The unusual element of this case is that, of course, it was a missing persons, but the police had suspicions very early on that Paul Hemming was responsible. And so it quite quickly turned from a missing persons case into a murder investigation, yet it was a murder investigation without a body. For the police, this presented a real problem because the clock was ticking. It's very difficult and very rare, actually, to get a conviction for murder without a body.
Police studied CCTV for clues, both to Natalie's whereabouts and her husband's movements around the time she disappeared. But after 3 weeks, there was still no sign of Natalie.
That breakthrough came when a man was out mowing some grass, just mowing a meadow. He smelled something that he didn't like. He thought it was probably a dead animal. He had a look, and he saw the bare legs of a human being. And that human being was Natalie Hemming.
All this time, Natalie's family had been waiting for news.
I had a missed call from our family liaison officer, and so did Kerry. And I remember we just looked at each other and said they found her. It was almost a relief, because 3 weeks of not knowing, it's that constant, you're sort of living on a knife edge, you know, you're waiting for your world to implode. And so getting that phone call, as horrific as it was, it suddenly felt like closure.
Now that she had been found, police needed to find out exactly how long Natalie had been dead.
In Natalie's case, this time frame is incredibly important because what we know is she was caught on CCTV on the Saturday night out with her boyfriend. She was last seen on Sunday, but then nothing. Police didn't know where she was. They didn't know where she had gone. Of course, Paul Hemming told the kids that she had just gone away.
If detectives could prove when she died, it could tie Paul Hemming to her disappearance and her death.
If the police know exactly how long the body has been there, it will really help them knit together their case from when the person was last seen alive.
Police began a forensic examination, but after 8 weeks, were still no closer to establishing a time of death. Until one of the team contacted expert witness Martin Hall, an insect specialist at the Natural History Museum.
It was actually a young scientist who I had mentored myself, so I knew that her collection of insects would be good. She came to the Natural History Museum and passed over the insect specimens, and I was able to begin my part of the investigation.
As an expert witness, Martin has a unique set of skills.
When someone dies, they immediately start to decompose. And the pathologist can use several clues to determine how long they've been dead in that sort of 3-day window after death. But there's a huge amount of variation between different bodies in that 3-day window. And beyond it, it's extremely difficult for a pathologist to determine a time of death. However, our insects can then take over and help us. They become almost the only tool that pathologists can use. The insect biological clock keeps ticking and can then become almost the only clue as to how long someone's been dead for.
Among the insect evidence were blowfly larvae recovered from Natalie's body and around the crime scene. To calculate a time of death, first, Martin had to identify which species of blowfly he was dealing with.
The life cycles of all blowflies are very similar, so egg to larva to puparia to adult fly, but the rates of development can vary. So even between sister species of the bluebottle fly, there can be quite a big difference. So it's very important to get the identification correct if you want to get the timing right. The species of blowfly that we found on the body of the victim were bluebottle blowflies, and they were of two species, Calliphora vomitoria and Calliphora vicina. And it was quite interesting that vomitoria was the most abundant species. This is a more rural species in wooded areas.
This was a crucial discovery. It allowed Martin to establish a timeline of events around Natalie's death.
So So the fact that vomitoria was so dominant compared to vicina is consistent with the body having been placed at the scene soon after death rather than having been stored indoors for some time.
But detectives needed more. It was critical they could prove exactly when Natalie had been killed. While Martin continued his analysis, they looked more closely at their prime suspect, Paul Hemming.
When I first met him, honestly, he just seemed like a normal bloke. But then Natalie always said he had two faces. He had the face that we all saw and the face that she lived with.
During the 10 years that he and Natalie were together, it turned out that she had reported him to the police for domestic abuse. He had thrown a telephone at her head, cutting her head open, and then refused to take her to the hospital before assaulting her again. Eventually, when he did take her to the hospital, left her with the chilling words, "If you tell anybody about this, I will kill you." She did try to leave him.
Whenever their relationship had ended previously, it had always been in an argument or chaos. But this time it was planned, it was organised. She had, for the first time, really made the decision that this was it. She wasn't going back. It was all amicable, it was perfectly civil. He was going his way, she was going her way. It was the end of the relationship. I think it was a couple of months, she'd started talking to this guy at work, just a nice guy, and I think she suddenly realised that actually there are nice guys out there that don't do the things that were happening to her. And then that weekend, she's spent the weekend with him.
Detectives now asked if Paul Hemming could have murdered Natalie on Sunday night when she returned to the family home. If expert witness Martin Hall could provide a time of death, they'd have their answer. Once again, it all hung on insect's life from the crime scene.
So these specimen tubes contain larvae of Calliphora vicina, the blue bottle blowfly, and they look quite different in size. The ones here are much bigger and these are smaller, obviously, but they're actually the same age, 48 hours old. And it's just simply the fact that these ones here grew at 27 degrees and these ones here at 21 degrees. If you don't take into account temperature, then there's no way you can tell how old the insects are. In a way, unlike us, they don't just age in days, they age proportional to heat as well.
For that reason, Martin had to allow for the Great British weather while making his calculations.
So this is a typical data logger. Basically, they enable you to put the temperature recording device at the scene where the body was found, and then you can relate the temperatures from the data logger to those at a nearby weather station for the same period. You can then use the data from that nearby weather station to estimate what the actual scene temperatures would be. What this allowed us to do is then actually work out what temperatures the insects were experiencing and how fast they would develop. In this case, we knew we had Calliphora vomitoria larvae just about to pupariate on the 25th of May. We were able to determine that they must have been laid as eggs on the body in the period 2nd to the 5th of May. So our evidence that the insects must have found her body in the period 2nd to 5th of May confirmed that she must have died very soon after last being seen alive.
This new evidence now helped link Paul Hemming to Natalie's murder. And by piecing together the clues, the history of domestic violence, CCTV, mobile phone data, and other circumstantial evidence, detectives revealed what happened.
She had been out with her new boyfriend the night before, and she had returned on that Sunday evening to tell Paul Hemming that it was all over. She'd waited until the 3 kids were upstairs asleep in their bed, and then broken the news to him that she was leaving him. Hemming flew into a violent rage. He beat Natalie Hemming to death and then took her body, wrapped it in a rug and buried it in woodland 30 miles away.
police charged Paul Hemming with murder, preventing the lawful burial of a body and obstructing the coroner. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
I've written and covered a lot of gruesome murder cases and a lot of very bad individuals. Paul Hemming is without doubt one of the nastiest, conniving, destructive individuals that I've ever had the misfortune to come across. He still continued to deny it. He almost seemed to revel in it, this defiance, right to the end, even as he was being led to the cells, as he mouthed the words, "I enjoyed every minute," to Natalie's distraught family.
For Natalie's family, the work of the expert witnesses and police played a huge part in the verdict.
I'm massively grateful for all the work that they've done. And in terms of the police as well, I wish we'd had the opportunity to actually speak to all of them, because I know the dedication and hours that they put in, that, you know, some of them weren't going home and things to their own families so that our family had closure. You know, that's amazing.
It was curiosity that got me into science. So being confronted with a different type of evidence of this kind was interesting and a challenge in a way.
October 1999. Holbeck, Leeds. George Eckersley has reported his wife Denise missing. The events that followed caught the interest of criminal psychologist Ruth Tully.
George and Denise Eckersley had been married for 4 years and were planning a trip to Europe. However, just before they were due to go, George phoned the police and reported his wife missing.
Denise was nowhere to be found. The couple's car was missing. Denise's daughter from a previous marriage was getting anxious.
Denise Eckersley, who was 47 and had 4 children, was reported missing from her home in Holbeck in Leeds on October the 12th.
Police began to investigate and discovered CCTV footage of a woman who looked like Denise walking near the beach in Cleethorpes, nearly 80 miles away. But there was more to come.
Several days later, a letter arrived, seemingly from Denise, which basically said that she'd been unfaithful and couldn't go on. Even more worrying was that her belongings were found on a beach, along with a bottle of vodka.
Among Denise's belongings was a handbag containing a key to a locker at Cleethorpes railway station. There, police found a holdall packed with her clothing. It seemed Denise had run away and then taken her own life, just as the letter described. But not everyone was convinced.
Denise's daughter raised concerns about the handwriting in the letter, which she said was not her mother's.
Police continued their search for signs of Denise until the remains of human bones were discovered at a warehouse half an hour from the Eckersleys' home.
This industrial estate on the outskirts of Brighouse, just off the M62, is where the human remains have been found, but police haven't revealed the exact location.
The bones were discovered in the ashes of a bonfire at the premises. And most suspicious of all, it was the workplace of Denise's husband, George.
These events rocked the local community. George was well known and people believed him to be a kind-hearted man. They couldn't believe what had happened.
Denise Eckersley's disappearance was looking increasingly like murder, and her husband the prime suspect. But police had no idea if the bones in the ashes were actually Denise's. They needed an expert witness and turned to forensic osteologist Martin Everson.
The police brought in some fragments of bone and asked me to examine them. It seemed to me that some of these fragments very probably could have been human. So we asked the police to bring in the rest of the material. So over the next few days, they came in with half a dozen containers, and in total there were approaching 3,000 fragments of burnt bone, nearly all of them no bigger than the tip of your fingertip.
Martin spent the next few weeks sifting through the fragments.
I found a number of skeletal fragments that had to be human. Phalanges, fingertips and toes. Parts of the cranial bones that clearly had sutures.
Once he knew they were human remains, Martin began to build a profile of the victim.
There was nothing to suggest that this was a juvenile. They all appeared to be adult bones. They were all quite gracile, so this wasn't the skeleton of a robust male. This was a fine skeleton and therefore more likely to be female than male.
Martin next looked for evidence that could reveal more precise details about the victim's identity and made a breakthrough.
There were some molar roots of teeth that allowed some degree of age estimation of the remains, an adult, and a single porcelain premolar crown. Typically, the enamel crown is destroyed by heating. However, in this instance, there was a porcelain crown which had survived the burning process and could be compared with that of the missing person during life.
Dental records confirmed it was a match to Denise Eckersley. As Martin analysed the bones more closely, they began to reveal a chilling story of her death.
There were 7 bone fragments which contained cut and saw marks, the bones that somebody might attempt to cut through if they were dismembering a body. And they were of different shapes, which showed that a sharp-bladed instrument had been used, which had left V-shaped cut marks, and the saw had been used, which left box-shaped cut marks, clearly diagnostic of a saw of a certain size. There were striation marks on the bones, which showed where the saw had cut through the bone.
Denise's body had been cut up and then burnt. Police strongly suspected George Eckersley of planning and carrying out his wife's murder, but still needed more proof. Detectives turned again to the letter apparently sent by Denise before taking her own life. The letter was sent to a forensic laboratory for testing, where scientists found more incriminating evidence.
DNA on the envelope was found to match George Eckersley, Denise's husband.
Detectives quickly moved to arrest George Eckersley, catching up with him at Bradford Airport, about to board a flight to Amsterdam.
He later admitted hitting his wife with a candlestick, dismembering her body and incinerating it at his place of work.
As Eckersley revealed the details of his crime, it became clear just how calculated he had been.
It transpired that the person at caught on camera was actually George, dressed as a woman in a blonde wig. George was engaging in an elaborate charade for up to a month, trying to convince people that Denise was still alive. He drove all around the northwest so that there would appear to be movement. He used the bank card to provide evidence that she was still alive. He even made several emotional appeals to the public and to her to return home so that people would think she was alive, and also wore her underwear so that when it was later found, it seemed worn as if she was still alive and wearing it until the point that he staged the suicide.
In 2001, George Eckersley was tried for his wife's murder. He pleaded guilty.
It's clear that the press really latched on to the fact that George dressed up as Denise to try and impersonate her to fool the police. It was almost put across in a slightly darkly comic way, and I can really see how that would sell papers. It's not something we see every day. It's quite unusual. What we need to remember in a case like this is that there are victims left behind. There's Denise's family, and there are a whole level of people who are affected by this tragic, tragic case.
For criminal psychologist Ruth Tully, George's behaviour gave a fascinating insight into the psychology of a criminal mind.
As a psychologist, what interests me is not just the behaviour within the tragic offence, but it's also the behaviour afterwards. I'd be very interested in assessing George's personality to look at if there were any key traits present that helped him to deceive people so calmly in terms of the lack of chaos afterwards. Quite often I see people who commit a serious crime and genuinely don't know what to do afterwards. They may admit to what they've done, or they may try a rushed attempt at covering things up. But there's something very different in a case where someone goes to such extreme lengths to try and cover up what they've done.
George Eckersley was sentenced to life with a recommendation he serve at least 16 years. Martin's evidence was crucial in establishing the intent and premeditation behind the crime.
We were able to show that this person, the perpetrator, planned this process and went to some length to carry it out. And it was reassuring to hear that the judge felt it had allowed him to say something in their judgment regarding the state of mind of the individual, in as much as it shows forethought and planning.
This was a really complex case. There was a lot of evidence to pick through, but because of George's deception, it wasn't clear what any of it meant. That's where forensic scientists and experts will pick through all of that information to the most minute detail to interpret it correctly to ultimately aid the course of justice.
I think it was gratifying to find something out of 3,000 pieces that actually were relevant. It was good to know that I was able to make a helpful contribution to a major homicide investigation. That was very reassuring.